I used to think betrayal came from strangers, from those who slipped into your life uninvited. I never imagined it could wear the faces of the children I raised. The day it all began was quiet, too quiet. The kind of morning that smells of rain before the sky decides whether to pour. I sat in the lawyer's office, clutching the edge of my purse like a lifeline, waiting for him to begin. My husband's name, Richard Hayes, rested at the top of the folder between us, printed in cold, impersonal ink. He had been gone only 2 weeks. 35 years of marriage condensed into a few legal pages. My children sat beside me. Michael, my eldest, adjusted his cufflinks with the same composure he used in board meetings. Laura, graceful and detached, scrolled absently through her phone, pretending the moment wasn't happening. And Evan, my youngest, tapped his foot, trying to look calm while his knee bounced like a ticking clock. They were grown, successful, and, I thought, kind. When the lawyer cleared his throat, the room stilled. According to Mr. Hayes's will, he read, all assets, properties, and business shares are to be equally divided among his children. I waited for the rest, some mention of me, his wife, his partner through every storm, but nothing followed. The silence pressed against my ribs like a physical weight. "Excuse me," I said, my voice thin. "There must be a mistake." The lawyer's eyes softened. "I'm afraid these are Mr. Hayes's final wishes." Michael leaned forward, his tone too calm. "Mom, maybe Dad thought this would be easier. We'll take care of you." Take care of me? The words burned. I wasn't a charity case. I was the woman who'd stood beside their father when the company was only a dream scribbled on napkins. I'd cooked through bankruptcy, nursed through illness, and believed through failure. I looked at each of them in turn and saw something new, an eagerness they tried to hide, a glint of relief that this fortune was theirs now. Their father's death wasn't yet cold, but the inheritance was already dividing what was left of our family. As we left the office, rain finally began to fall, tapping against the windows like an unspoken verdict. My children walked ahead, talking in low voices about next steps and liquid assets. I trailed behind, invisible in my own story. In that moment, I realized the will wasn't just a document, it was a mirror. And what it reflected back at me was far more painful than the words it contained. That was the day I began to lose my children, not to time or distance, but to greed disguised as entitlement. And though I didn't know it yet, the true betrayal had only just begun. In the weeks that followed, grief became a routine, tidy, predictable, and hollow. The casseroles stopped coming, the condolences turned to silence, and the house felt too large for one heartbeat. I'd thought I understood loneliness before, but widowhood taught me its texture. It moves through rooms, hides in the corners of photographs, and whispers through the spaces someone once filled. Richard's absence was everywhere. His leather chair sat untouched by the fireplace, still holding the faint scent of his cologne. The morning paper still arrived, though no one read it. I caught myself setting 2 plates at breakfast before realizing I only needed one. It's strange how love lingers in habits long after the person is gone. I try to hold my children close, but they seem to be slipping further away. Michael, ever the businessman, started visiting with spreadsheets and financial summaries. "Just keeping things organized," he said, though his tone carried ownership more than concern. Laura called occasionally, her voice bright but distant, speaking more about renovation ideas for the house than about how I was coping. Evan came last, gentle, uncertain, always asking for advice he rarely took. He'd inherited Richard's charm but none of his discipline. One evening, I found Michael sitting at Richard's desk, going through drawers that had been untouched since the funeral. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. He didn't look up. "Just handling some business. Dad would have wanted me to." I studied him for a long moment. He looked so much like his father at that age, confident, composed, utterly sure of his right to control. But where Richard had built, Michael managed. He calculated. He owned. Later that night, I stood in the garden Richard had planted for me years ago, roses, wild and defiant, bursting through the autumn chill. He used to say they reminded him of me, stubborn, beautiful, hard to uproot. I wondered if that's why he'd trusted the children so completely, believing they'd inherited that same loyalty. But beneath the surface of our family's grief, I could feel something shifting. Small things, like Michael's subtly moving files from my reach, or Laura suggesting I downsize since the house was too much work for me alone. It wasn't hostility, it was quiet, deliberate displacement. Each act seemed harmless on its own, but together they formed a pattern, a slow rewriting of ownership, as if I were being edited out of my own life. At night, I lay awake listening to the rain on the roof, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Yet some part of me already knew the truth. The inheritance hadn't changed my children, it had unmasked them. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's last decision had set something in motion that none of us were ready to face. The first real argument came over dinner. Michael had invited himself over, claiming he wanted to check in. By the time Laura and Evan arrived, I knew what it was really about, the estate. The table, once a place of laughter and Sunday roasts, now felt like a boardroom, every chair occupied by someone preparing for a negotiation. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's best to sell the main house." My fork paused midair. "Sell it? This is your father's home." "Our home." Laura sighed, twirling her wine glass between manicured fingers. "It's too big for you, Mom. You don't need all this space. You could get a nice apartment, something easier to manage." Evan didn't meet my eyes. "They're just thinking practically," he murmured. "Practically," I echoed, my voice low. "Is that what this is about? Practicality?" Michael leaned forward, elbows on the table, confidence radiating from him like heat. "You know how Dad ran things. Everything efficient, clean, logical. He wouldn't want you living here alone, trying to maintain this place. It's better for everyone." I looked around the table at the faces I'd once known better than my own. My children, the ones I'd stayed up nights nursing through fevers, cheering through heartbreaks, now sat before me like polite strangers rehearsing a pitch. "I'm not ready to leave," I said finally. "And I won't be forced out of my own home." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Laura broke it first, her voice careful. "Mom, you know we love you, but you have to let go. It's just a house. Just a house." The words sank like stones. Every wall here had a story. Evan's height marks etched by the kitchen door, the crack on the stair Richard promised to fix, the garden where he'd proposed. And now, to them, it was nothing more than property value. After they left, I sat alone for hours, staring at the empty plates. The house felt heavier, as if it too sensed it was no longer wanted. The next morning, I went through Richard's old files, looking for anything, some note, some letter, that could explain why he'd left everything to them. I told myself I just wanted clarity, but what I really wanted was reassurance that I hadn't been forgotten. In the bottom drawer, beneath old invoices, I found a thin, leather-bound folder labeled private. Inside were letters, dozens of them. The handwriting was unmistakably Richard's, but the recipient wasn't me. Grace. The name struck like a whisper from a past I'd never known. His former business partner, long retired, long forgotten, or so I thought. The early letters were harmless, all about hotels and investments. But as I read further, the tone changed. He wrote about missing her, about gratitude that felt too personal, too tender. The last one, dated 6 months before he died, made my breath catch. "You've been my closest confidant, Grace. You always understood what I couldn't say. I've made arrangements. The children will have what they need, and you, too. It's what feels right." My hands shook as I folded the paper. Arrangements? What did that mean? Had he given her part of the estate too? Was this why my name wasn't there, because another woman already held his loyalty in secret? For the first time since the funeral, I cried. Not the quiet, composed tears people expect from widows, but the kind that come from somewhere deeper, where love and humiliation meet. Later that evening, I called Michael. "Did you know about Grace?" I asked. The pause was too long. "Mom, don't go digging into the past. It won't help." "So you did know?" He exhaled, irritated. "Dad worked with her for years. She helped him with the business, that's all." let it go. But I couldn't. Something about the way he said it, too quick, too rehearsed, told me there was more. That night, as rain pattered softly against the windows, I realized I had spent my entire life trusting people who saw my love as currency. My husband had died, leaving secrets, and my children were slowly spending the remnants of my faith. Whatever Richard's arrangements meant, they had started something none of us could undo. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, tucked between dull envelopes and advertisements. The handwriting on the front was neat, deliberate, elegant in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was signed simply, Grace Alden. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away. I'd spent weeks trying to forget her name, to bury the idea of her somewhere beneath my grief. But curiosity is a dangerous mercy. It convinces you that knowing the truth will bring peace. Inside, the letter was brief but disarming. Elena, if you're reading this, I owe you an apology. Richard spoke of you often. He admired you, your strength, your patience, your unwavering loyalty. He told me once that you were the only person who ever truly believed in him. I need you to know something. He changed the will because he didn't want the children to grow dependent. He trusted they'd learn responsibility without leaning on his wealth. The rest, what truly belonged to you, he placed elsewhere, hidden under your name alone. He wanted to protect you in the only way he knew how. Grace. The room seemed to tilt. I reread it 3 times, tracing each letter until the ink blurred through my tears. Richard hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't betrayed me. He tried, clumsily perhaps, to save me from our children's greed. At the bottom of the page was an address, Harrison and Wells Private Bank, Boston. My hands trembled as I folded the letter. 2 days later, I stood before the bank clerk, clutching my ID like proof of existence. When she returned from the vault, she carried a small envelope embossed with Richard's initials. Inside was a single key, a passbook, and a note in his handwriting. Familiar, looping, unmistakable. Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've seen how the children have changed, what money has made of them. I couldn't bear to leave you unprotected. This account is yours alone. Live, my love. Start again, if you must. Don't let grief chain you to what's already lost. It wasn't the fortune that undid me. It was the recognition. After all the doubts, after every moment I'd felt unseen, he'd been watching, quietly planning for me to stand on my own. When I returned home, Michael and Laura were waiting. Their faces were tight, cautious. Mom, Michael began, we heard from the bank. There's been some movement on the estate. I looked at him steadily. Yes. Your father left me something of my own. Laura frowned. He never mentioned. Of course not, I interrupted softly. He wanted me to see who you'd become first. Their silence said everything. You inherited his money, I said, but not his heart. He worked for decades to build something worth protecting, and you turned it into a competition. Michael's jaw tightened. Laura's eyes fell. Evan stood near the door, guilt written across his face, but not strong enough to move him closer. For the first time, I didn't cry. I felt strangely calm, as if the world had finally rearranged itself into an order I could understand. Richard had trusted me to finish the story he couldn't, and for the first time since his death, I knew exactly how. I left the house 2 weeks later. There was no confrontation, no grand announcement, just the quiet closing of a door that had seen too much. I packed only what I needed, a few clothes, the passbook Richard left me, a photo of us from the early days when love was simple and promises still felt unbreakable. The movers came at dawn. By the time the sun began to warm the garden, I was gone. I didn't look back. Some chapters end better without witnesses. I rented a small cottage near the sea, a whitewashed place with creaky floors and salt-stained windows. The first morning there, I woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore, and for a brief, fragile moment, I forgot everything that had come before. For months, I didn't speak to the children. They sent messages at first, short, awkward apologies wrapped in excuses. We didn't understand, Mom. We were trying to do what's best. But every word felt rehearsed, like guilt written by committee.
I didn't reply.
Silence, I learned, is its own kind of truth. The money Richard left me was modest compared to the fortune he'd given them, but it was enough. Enough to live, enough to breathe, enough to feel like myself again. I started volunteering at a local library, tending to the rose garden outside. The soil here is softer than the one I left behind. It doesn't resist your touch. Sometimes I still think of Richard, not the businessman or the man who built an empire, but the one who used to hum while washing dishes, the one who planted those stubborn roses because he knew I loved the smell of home. He wasn't perfect, neither was I. But in the end, he'd given me something more valuable than wealth: freedom without apology. As for my children, I hope they find their way back, not to me, but to themselves. Greed is a terrible inheritance. It eats through love until nothing remains but want. On quiet evenings, I sit by the window, watching the horizon blur between sea and sky. The world feels wide again, unbound. And sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I can almost hear Richard's voice, soft, certain, carried by the tide. Live, my love. And for the first time, I truly am.